It was a crisp Friday evening in New York City, and the Whitmore Grill was buzzing with life. A Michelin-starred restaurant known for its exclusivity, it was a favorite among CEOs, socialites, and Hollywood elites. Inside, men in tailored suits sipped expensive wine while women in designer dresses posed for pictures with their extravagant seafood towers. The air smelled of truffle risotto and aged steak, while soft jazz played in the background, completing the image of modern luxury. Among the high-profile guests, a man walked in alone. He wasn't wearing a suit or a silk tie, just an old flannel shirt, jeans, and a pair of well-worn boots. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and a quiet, thoughtful expression rested on his face. Keanu Reeves had entered the restaurant unnoticed. He moved to a corner table, his usual spot, and settled in with a simple request, a whiskey neat. The veteran staff recognized him instantly, but they knew better than to make a fuss. For months, he had been coming here, blending into the background, observing. What most didn't know was that the Whitmore Grill belonged to him. 6 months ago, Keanu had quietly purchased the restaurant not for prestige but for something deeper. He believed that a restaurant's greatness wasn't in its chandeliers or imported caviar, it was in the way it treated people. And tonight, that philosophy was about to be tested. Across the room, Victoria Langley, the young, ambitious manager, took notice. With a critical glance at Keanu's casual attire, she sighed in frustration. To her, he didn't belong. And in that moment, she made a decision that would become the biggest mistake of her career. Victoria Langley had worked hard to earn her position as the manager of the Whitmore Grill. She prided herself on maintaining the restaurant's reputation as one of the most exclusive dining spots in New York. Every night, she personally oversaw the seating arrangements, ensuring only the right kind of guests occupied the best tables. So when she spotted Keanu Reeves sitting at one of the prime corner tables, dressed in an old flannel shirt and jeans, her lips tightened in irritation. To her, he looked completely out of place among the well-dressed elites sipping their $500 bottles of wine. She adjusted her blazer, put on her most professional smile, and strode toward his table. "Good evening, sir," she said with a practiced politeness. "I couldn't help but notice that you've been nursing that whiskey for quite some time. Are you waiting for someone?" Keanu looked up from his glass, meeting her gaze with a calm, steady expression. "No, just enjoying the drink." Victoria hesitated. Something about his voice seemed familiar, but she dismissed the thought. She was too focused on the fact that a man dressed like that was sitting in her dining room. "Well," she continued, "we have a strict seating policy, and this table is typically reserved for our more distinguished guests." She gestured slightly to the impeccably dressed couples at nearby tables. Keanu raised an eyebrow but remained silent, taking another slow sip of his whiskey. Victoria took his silence as a sign that he didn't understand. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bar?" she suggested. "It's more casual, and we have an excellent selection of drinks there." Across the room, Daniel Morales, a young busboy, had been watching the interaction closely. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew who the man in the flannel shirt was. His father had been a huge fan of Keanu Reeves, and together they had watched The Matrix and John Wick films more times than he could count. To Daniel, Keanu wasn't just a movie star, he was a legend. And now that legend was being insulted. Daniel clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to step in. He wanted to tell Victoria to stop before she embarrassed herself any further, but he knew his place. He was just a busboy. Meanwhile, Keanu remained as composed as ever. He set his glass down slowly and met Victoria's gaze again. "I'm comfortable here," he said simply. His calm demeanor only irritated Victoria further. She glanced at a group of young tech executives waiting by the host stand. They were dressed in crisp suits, checking their watches impatiently. "I understand," she said, her voice now laced with condescension. "But our executive chef prepares a very exclusive menu, and the prices." She paused meaningfully, letting her eyes drift over Keanu's casual attire reflect the caliber of our establishment. At the next table, an older couple, longtime regulars of the Whitmore Grill, shifted uncomfortably. The husband opened his mouth to say something, but his wife gently placed a hand on his arm. She had seen that look in Keanu's eyes before, the same quiet intensity that had preceded some of cinema's most unforgettable moments. "I'm aware of the prices," Keanu said, his voice steady, carrying the same gravelly tone that had commanded attention on screen for decades. Victoria's polite facade cracked slightly. She pulled out her order pad and tapped her pen against it impatiently. "Well then, sir, shall I explain the menu to you slowly?" Her voice carried a distinct jab at his age, as if assuming he wouldn't understand the complexity of fine dining. That was the final straw for Daniel. He couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Miss Langley," he said cautiously, stepping forward. "Maybe I should get Mr. Elliot." Victoria shot him a sharp glare. "Stay out of this, Daniel. Go bust the tables, that's what you're here for." Keanu, however, had been watching the young busboy with particular interest. There was something in Daniel's eyes, a quiet respect, a recognition. Unlike Victoria, he knew. Victoria turned back to Keanu, exasperated. "One last time, sir. This isn't some roadside diner. This is the Whitmore Grill. Perhaps in your day things were different, but now we have standards." A hushed silence fell over the nearby tables. Other guests were pretending not to stare, but the tension in the room was undeniable. Keanu placed his whiskey down on the table slowly and deliberately, the simple motion commanding more attention than Victoria's entire outburst. "In my day?" he repeated, his voice quieter now, but carrying even more weight. Victoria crossed her arms. "Yes. Back when people thought they could just walk into any place, dress however they wanted, order the cheapest drink, and take up space meant for real customers." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Keanu let a small, knowing smile play at the corner of his lips. He glanced around the restaurant, then back at Victoria. "Interesting," he said. "And what exactly does real mean to you?" The way he said it sent a chill down Victoria's spine. She straightened up, trying to regain her composure. "It means," she declared, "that some places aren't for everyone. Our clientele expects a certain ambience." She gestured toward the young entrepreneurs taking selfies with their gold leaf desserts. "They get it. They respect what the Whitmore Grill represents." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, after a long pause, he asked the question that would change the course of the evening. "Tell me, Victoria, who do you think owns this place?" The tension in the Whitmore Grill was thick enough to cut with a knife. The hum of polite conversation had faded as nearby diners subtly tuned in to the unfolding exchange. Victoria Langley, the restaurant's ambitious manager, stood with her arms crossed, her carefully curated demeanor beginning to crack. Across from her, Keanu Reeves sat in his usual corner table, relaxed but unreadable. His well-worn flannel shirt and jeans contrasted sharply against the sea of designer suits and evening gowns. For the past few minutes, Victoria had been trying no, insisting that he move to the bar. She had implied he couldn't afford the menu. She had made a pointed remark about his age. And now she had all but stated that the Whitmore Grill was for people who belonged, people like the wealthy patrons taking selfies with their $200 wagyu steaks, not for some middle-aged man in casual clothes nursing a simple glass of whiskey. Keanu's eyes, calm as ever, met hers. Then, with a quiet certainty, he asked the question that sent a chill down her spine. "Tell me, Victoria, who do you think owns this place?" Victoria blinked. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she quickly dismissed it. Surely he wasn't implying, no, impossible. "This restaurant," she said slowly, as if explaining to a child, "is owned by Mr. Whitmore. James Whitmore, one of the most respected figures in fine dining. A man who understands class." She straightened her blazer, her confidence returning. "And I can assure you, sir, he wouldn't tolerate someone disrespecting the image of his establishment." Keanu's lips curled into a half smile. He pulled out his phone and, with an unhurried motion, made a single call. "Elliot," he said, "could you bring me the paperwork?" "Yes, right now." The restaurant fell silent. Diners who had been pretending not to listen now abandoned all pretense, their gazes locked on the scene unfolding before them. Victoria's confidence wavered for the first time. What are you doing?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, fingers lightly tapping the rim of his glass. "I'm just clearing up a misunderstanding." Moments later, Elliot Foster, the restaurant's longtime accountant, stepped into the dining room, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He approached Keanu with a respectful nod, then set the folder on the table. "Here you go, Mr. Reeves." Victoria's stomach dropped. Keanu opened the folder and slid out a stack of documents, flipping to a specific page. Then, he turned it toward Victoria. "6 months ago," he said, tapping the ownership transfer, "James Whitmore retired. And I bought this restaurant." The blood drained from Victoria's face. A hushed gasp rippled through the restaurant. At a nearby table, the older couple who had been watching the exchange knowing glances. The young busboy, Daniel Morales, stood frozen, barely breathing. Keanu picked up his whiskey, took a slow sip, and set the glass down gently. His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. So tell me, Victoria, who doesn't belong here? The silence in the Whitmore grill was absolute. The quiet hum of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, even the soft jazz playing in the background, all of it seemed to fade as the weight of Keanu Reeves' words settled over the restaurant. Victoria Langley stood frozen, staring at the ownership documents in front of her. Her perfectly rehearsed confidence was unraveling, replaced by the horrifying realization that she had spent the last several minutes lecturing and insulting the owner of the restaurant. Keanu remained calm, his expression unreadable as he studied her. Then, after a long pause, he leaned forward slightly. "You were saying something about standards, Victoria?" His voice was even, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to salvage the situation, but there was none. She had been so focused on her idea of modern luxury, the wealthy tech executives, the socialites, the influencers, that she had completely disregarded the most fundamental principle of hospitality, treating every guest with respect. At a nearby table, the older couple who had been watching the exchange sat with knowing expressions. Across the room, Daniel Morales, the young busboy, was still holding his tray, his heart pounding. Keanu finally broke the silence. "6 months ago, when I bought the Whitmore Grill, I didn't do it for prestige," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I did it to protect what this place used to stand for. 50 years ago, when I was just another struggling actor, I came here. Back then, no one knew my name. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but the owner at the time treated me with kindness, like I was the most important guest in the room, not because of who I was, but because that's just how he treated people." Keanu gestured around the dining room, his gaze moving over the neatly dressed guests who were now listening intently. "That's what real class is. Not overpriced cocktails, not gold-leaf desserts, respect." Victoria swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of her order pad. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know." "No," Keanu said, his voice still patient. "You didn't know. And that's the problem." A beat of silence passed. Then, Keanu turned to Daniel. "You," he said, nodding toward the young busboy. "You knew who I was, didn't you?" Daniel straightened, setting his tray down. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice steady. "I did." Keanu nodded. "And yet, you didn't treat me any differently. That's the kind of person I want in this restaurant." He leaned back in his chair. "So here's what's going to happen. Daniel, how would you like to start training as a waiter?" The young man's eyes widened. "Me, sir?" Keanu nodded. "You understand what real service means. We need more people like that." Daniel, speechless for a moment, finally managed to say, "Yes, sir, I'd be honored." Keanu then turned back to Victoria. "As for you, Victoria, you have a choice. You can leave right now and find another job at a place where appearances matter more than people." He paused. "Or you can stay and learn what real hospitality is." Victoria blinked, caught off guard. She had expected to be fired on the spot. Instead, Keanu was offering her something unexpected, a second chance. She glanced around the room. The longtime staff members, the veteran servers, even some of the high-profile guests, they were all waiting for her response. Finally, she lowered her gaze and nodded. "I'd like to stay, sir, if you'll let me." Keanu studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good choice." The tension in the restaurant seemed to dissolve. The older couple at the nearby table began to clap, and slowly, others joined in. Not for the celebrity in their midst, but for the lesson they had just witnessed, a reminder that true class isn't about wealth or status, but about how we treat others. And from that night on, the Whitmore Grill would never be the same. The tension that had gripped the Whitmore Grill just moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by an air of reflection. The restaurant's guests, who had initially dismissed the exchange as an amusing distraction, now sat in quiet contemplation. Victoria Langley, once so sure of her authority, stood humbled before Keanu Reeves, the man she had tried to remove from his own restaurant. The weight of her mistakes was heavy, but the unexpected second chance Keanu had offered her was even heavier. As the applause from a few diners faded, Keanu picked up his whiskey, took a slow sip, and set it down with quiet finality. Then he turned toward Daniel Morales, the young busboy who had shown more respect and understanding than Victoria had. "Daniel," Keanu said, his voice carrying across the room, "tomorrow you start training as a waiter." Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me, sir?" Keanu nodded. "You recognized me, but more importantly, You understood something that too many people forget: respect isn't about appearances. The young man's hands trembled slightly as he straightened his posture. I won't let you down, Mr. Reeves. Keanu gave him a reassuring smile. I know you won't. Victoria, still shaken, swallowed her pride and turned to Daniel. I hope you'll be patient with me while I learn too. Daniel hesitated, then extended his hand. We'll learn together. Victoria shook his hand, a quiet acknowledgement of the night's lesson. As the staff began to return to their tasks, the Whitmore Grill didn't feel quite the same. Something had shifted. The quiet lesson Keanu had just demonstrated had rippled through every person in the dining room, making them reconsider what it meant to belong in such a place. The older couple who had been watching from the start raised their glasses. A few of the younger influencers who had been busy snapping pictures put their phones down, exchanging glances as if realizing how shallow their obsession with exclusivity had been. Even some of the tech executives who had been impatiently waiting for their table now seemed less concerned with their status and more intrigued by the man who had just redefined what class truly meant. Keanu glanced at Elliot, the longtime accountant, who gave him a knowing nod. This was why he had bought the Whitmore Grill, not to turn it into another overpriced status symbol, but to protect something far more valuable, a place where every guest was treated with dignity. As he rose from his chair, Keanu turned back to Victoria one last time. Make sure no one else ever feels like they don't belong here, he said simply. Victoria nodded, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Yes, sir. Keanu reached for his leather jacket draped over the chair and slid it on, giving one last look around the restaurant. Satisfied, he walked toward the door, nodding to a few longtime staff members as he passed. Then, just as he reached the exit, he paused. Without turning back, he called out to the room, his voice carrying that familiar, unmistakable warmth. I'll see you all next Friday. And with that, he stepped out into the crisp New York night, leaving behind a restaurant forever changed not by money, not by status, but by a simple lesson in respect. The lesson of that night at the Whitmore Grill didn't fade, it became part of the restaurant's story. Word spread quickly, not just among the staff, but throughout New York's dining scene. Guests who had once come for exclusivity now returned for something more meaningful. They wanted to be part of a place that valued people over appearances. For Victoria Langley, the experience was humbling. She had built her career on the idea that luxury was defined by wealth and status, but Keanu Reeves had shattered that illusion in a single night. True class, she learned, wasn't about designer suits or Michelin stars, it was about dignity. Under Keanu's ownership, the Whitmore Grill quietly transformed. The gold leaf garnishes and overpriced cocktails remained, but so did a sense of warmth and authenticity that had once been forgotten. The veteran staff, who had seen the restaurant's past glory, smiled knowingly. It was back. And every Friday evening, a familiar figure would walk in. Dressed in his usual flannel shirt and jeans, Keanu Reeves would take his seat at the corner table, sip his whiskey, and watch. Not for luxury, not for prestige, but to ensure that the values of kindness, humility, and respect continued to thrive. Because in the end, the Whitmore Grill wasn't just a restaurant, it was a reminder of what truly matters. And those who dined there never forgot it. That night at the Whitmore Grill wasn't just about a restaurant, it was about a mindset. In a world where people are often judged by their appearances, wealth, or social status, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone that true class isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about how you treat others. Victoria Langley learned a hard but valuable lesson. She had spent years believing that exclusivity and luxury were what made a place special. But in one evening, she saw firsthand that respect is what truly defines greatness. No matter how expensive the furniture or how high the prices, a restaurant or any establishment is nothing without genuine hospitality. As for Daniel Morales, the young busboy who stood up for what was right, he got more than just a promotion. He became a symbol of the kind of people the world needs more of, those who see value in others beyond surface-level judgments. And what about Keanu? He continued to return to the Whitmore Grill every Friday night, sitting at his usual corner table, ensuring that the restaurant stayed true to the values he had fought to preserve. His quiet presence was a reminder that class isn't about status, it's about character. This story teaches us that real success isn't measured by money, clothes, or power, but by how we treat others. The way we show kindness, respect, and humility says far more about us than any luxury ever could. So let me ask you, have you ever been judged unfairly? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much did this story inspire you? Let me know below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video. Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.